All right. Well, once again, it's good to be here this morning. Good to have all of you together today. I hope that Valentine's Day was good for you. I hope, guys, you remembered. And I'm saying that because I was at Publix on Friday afternoon, and I had already gotten my stuff on Thursday, so I wasn't there doing last minute anything. I was just getting something. But there was a guy in front of me explaining to the cashier how he had forgotten, and he was quickly running, and he had like a ridiculous assortment of Valentine's things that made no sense. But anyway, and then I'm looking around at all the other guys, and there's a lot of running and, grabbing stuff. But anyway, it was good times, good day. Hope it was good for you. Hey, if you did not get an outline when you came in, there's tables right there in the back. You will want to have an outline as we've been going through this series. There's a lot of information. There are blanks to be filled out. So would love for you to go ahead and grab one if you would like to do that so you can track with us, have that information when you leave today. So if you're new, if you're just jumping in with us, we're in week 3 of a message series called Find Your Place. And in this series, we're trying to discover where it is that we fit in God's plan, in God's will. What are our gifts? What are our passions? How does our story, in other words, our life up to this point, how does it matter to what God is trying to accomplish in this world? And so we've been looking at that, studying that a little bit. Specifically, we kind of think about it this way, like GPS, gifts, passions, and story, that those 3 things coming together kind of help us figure out what God is calling us to do. It's just like the GPS in your car, on your smartphone. Those satellites are up there circling the earth. They kind of get together and they find your place here. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know how all that works. But anyway, all I know is when I pull my phone up and I hit Google Maps, you give it a second, satellites are trying to find me right now, and boom, I am found. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Okay, it's all right. That's the thing. So anyway, but those satellite signals eventually triangulate, and then they find your place on this earth to locate you. If you think about that in the same way, it's kind of like this process of triangulating those 3 things, the G, P, and the S, are these signals that once you bring those together, they help us figure out where we fit in what God is trying to do in this world, to discover our unique masterpiece mission. We've talked about gifts and abilities and looked at that last week. Today we're going to talk about that second one, though, the passion. Passion is that, is the energy that we add to the gifts and abilities and all of those things that really begins to move us in a particular direction. That's what we're going to be talking about this morning. So when I say passion, or when you think about the idea of being passionate, what comes to mind for you? I think about, like, just in the sports realm, you want to talk about people who are passionate. I don't know if you watched the Super Bowl, but those poor Kansas City Chiefs, they were dying for a win there, right? Because it had been forever. Like this picture right here, we've waited our whole lives for this moment. It's pitiful, man. We waited our whole lives. My whole life has been given to this moment right here. No, those poor Chiefs fans. But anyway, they got their wish, their desire. They're just crazy fans. You got this one right here, right when they won. They're just going nuts there in Kansas City. And it was funny. I didn't pull this other picture, but there's this guy. He's dressed up like the chief, the Indian kind of thing. And he just looks bad, so I didn't show that one. Anyway, then there's this one right here in our own backyard. We know what passion looks like here. You just go to Tiger Walk that everybody waits for hours and hours to go stand there so that we can see the coach and the players and all that. I went to the game Wednesday night, the Auburn-Alabama game. Was anybody else in the arena for that game? Holy moly. Yeah, the Kreitmeyers were right in front of me. You should have seen them. It was embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding. But that place was absolutely unbelievably loud. It was packed full of people who were going crazy. People were yelling at each other. They were yelling at the refs. They were just going nuts. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And I just took it in for a minute. I can remember just standing there looking around at one of the peak moments, and it was just like, wow, we are fired up people. And I'm like thinking of this sermon today, and I'm thinking everybody has passion of some sort, right? Everybody has a passion to give to something. And I guess that really what we're trying to figure out is how do we make sure that, those passions that God has given us, that we're using the best of those for the best thing in this life, the highest value, that mission that God has given to you and I. And while our gifts outline the direction in which we're heading, I think it's our passions that begin to add the power to that motivates us to pursue the calling that God has given us. So, in light of that, let me give you today's big idea, and this would be a point at which you'd want to start writing. In my masterpiece mission, my passions show me who and what I was made to fight for. So in my masterpiece mission, my passions show me who and what I was made to fight for. And really, I think that this is essential to pursuing our calling. God's call may take us into some very difficult and challenging places if we genuinely pursue that passion that He's given us. And we need to kind of understand what that looks like and really the battle that we're in. What is it that we're fighting for? Do we know that we're even in a battle? Have you seen the movie Saving Private Ryan? It's just on one of my top movie lists, mostly because it just reminds me of the incredible sacrifice that folks have made in our military and all of that. But boy, it's a hard movie to watch. It just is, man. It's so intense. It's so realistic, right? And that scene at the beginning of the movie when they're on the beach, you know what I'm talking about? That's just brutal. But they say, a lot of veterans say, that is the most realistic depiction of what actually happened when they were storming Omaha Beach that day. And, so if you think about that, soldiers coming in, Germans are up on the hill, they're shooting down at our soldiers coming on the beach there. People are dying, and it's just a crazy, chaotic scene. Well, can you imagine if while they're showing that scene, they pan over, and there's a little family on the beach sitting on their blanket with their kids, and they're playing in the sand, and they're making a sand castle, and they're eating their lunch, and Dad goes, I heard there's a war going on, but I just don't see it. I just don't get it. Yeah. What a ridiculous scene that would be. Everybody would be screaming, get off the beach, right? Wake up. Look at what you're in. Or what if some of those soldiers got together and said, you know what, we're just going to deny that there's a battle happening right here. We're just sick of it. And so they get some cards, and they pull out a blanket, and they sit down and just start playing cards. Well, everybody's running and shooting and all this kind of stuff. That ain't happening. Somebody would go, get up, get in the fight, right? You can't just sit there and deny the reality of what is happening around you. And yet I think sometimes that even as believers, we might get into that place where we look around and we go, I just don't see it. Where is the battle? Or maybe we just deny it because we don't want to get into that. We don't want to engage that. And yet God has called us to realize what we're in. We have to see it. I mean, really, when we were born, God put us onto this earth in the midst of the battle that had already been going on. And He's like, and I have given you tools and weapons, to help me as we battle these forces of evil that are in the world. So, here's the truth for you today. Each of us is born into a world at war, a spiritual war, and my masterpiece mission is my battle station. It is that place that God has called us to. And when you read the Gospels especially, you see Jesus in His time on earth, especially during His ministry years. He confronted evil all the time, didn't He? He literally confronted people who were possessed by demons, who recognized Jesus and who He was. And Jesus found Himself casting out evil, confronting evil, releasing people and freeing people all the time. Like, He showed us what the battle looked like in so many ways. But even, Paul and writers of the New Testament, they recognized the battle that we were in too. You go to Ephesians 6, 10 through 13, Paul says this. He says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in His mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. After you've done everything, you need to be standing at the end of this battle, at the end of the day, because you put the armor on, right? And boy, there are a lot of terms in here: rulers, principalities, powers, authorities, spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. It's like what's being described is a massive cosmic conflict going on. And it's important for us to know that while we're here. A lot of the struggles that we see physically around us are the result of spiritual issues. And it's important that we get that. I think we look at stuff in this world like just sin in general, but even more than that, the brokenness of the place in which we live with poverty, and you could just put a whole list there. Illiteracy, sexual brokenness, abuse, abortion, random shootings of innocent people, on and on and on. Just look at the news for 10 minutes and you see so much of that in the world. And at some point we have to say, you know what, there is an evil that is affecting this world that we live in. There is a clear good and there is a clear evil. And what do I need to do to be a part of trying to bring freedom to this world, to bring freedom to other people, because that is a part of what you and I have been called to do. And the thing that we don't want to do is get distracted by battles that don't really matter. And I'm sure that you've seen this just like I've seen this. I mean, it's usually just the little things. How about people yelling at refs out on the court or out on the field? It's like, wow, we get so fired up and we're like, ah. You've seen this? At Little League games? Man, you want to see people who are passionate? Go to a Little League football game or baseball game or something. Your parents coming out of the bleachers, to get on somebody. It's like, wrong people, wrong battle. Or how about the road ragers out there? People who are going nuts out there on the roads, and people who are getting fired up and they're giving people this and that out the window and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I mean, you don't do that, but those other people do. I don't do it. I never get mad at people when I'm driving. That's not an area that God's working on with me at all. But anyway, it's like, why? So angry, so passionate. Wrong people, wrong battle. I could list a million of those. We all know what that is in our own life. We don't want to waste our time with things that just don't really matter. I think that really we all long for something worth fighting for. I think every person is designed to go out there and fight the battle and know that it's something worth fighting, to slay the giants like David. God's calling us to step into the battle. So in our masterpiece mission, our passions show us who and what we were made to fight for. So let me take us back into 1 Samuel 17 this morning, that scene of David and Goliath and the Philistines and the Israelites at war. And, to give you a little history behind this is not a battle that just sort of brewed up overnight, that this thing had been going on for 200 years, that the Philistines had been invading Israel, literally almost taking them over several times. And so this is something that's been going on for a while now. And you remember that David's older brothers had been recruited. They were at the front lines, right? David had been recruited to take food to his brothers at the front line. That was his big deal at the time. When he gets on scene, though, what does he discover? This giant Goliath who keeps coming out and taunting Israel and taunting our God. And yet nobody on Israel's side is doing anything about it. David's highly upset about that, right? Also, something you need to know is that in ancient times, sometimes when battles were fought, nations would find their very best warrior, their biggest, strongest, the one who had defeated the most people, and they would send them out, and then their enemy, their opposition, would also pick their best warrior and send them out. And sometimes battles were fought just between two people, sort of mano a mano, right? And at the end of the day, whoever won that battle represented a whole nation, and the nation had won that battle. This is most likely what is happening here. The Philistines have sent their best guy out in Goliath from Gath and to fight this battle for them, and yet Israel had sent nobody because nobody would go. So there you go. And then David arrives on the scene. Also, something you need to know about the Philistines, they were a completely pagan culture. They believed in a god named Dagon, who was a fertility god. And so to appease Dagon, they would sacrifice children. This was not a lovely situation happening with these folks. So they were a completely pagan, completely enemies of God kind of a people. And so this is, again, what got David so fired up. He's like, look, don't you see what is happening here? That you're allowing this to go on. And so kind of like when we look at that and we see the Philistines and we see Goliath, just think about that when you look at the evils that are in the world and the injustices that are happening out there. Like, those are the Goliaths out there that God has called us to face, to go up against. David in Samuel 17:26, he says, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? I mean, he's fired up. And I guess David could have said, you know what? I'm too little. My sheep are alone on the hillside. I got to go. I got more food to bring to my brothers. I'll just give a little something here. Maybe I'll give a little time later. He could have made up a million excuses to not go do what he did, but he didn't. And when he comes up against Goliath, he says this to him. In 1 Samuel 17:45 and 48, he says, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. And so it was when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. I love that moment. I mean, that must have been inspiring and scary for all the other people watching him do it, but he ran toward Goliath. He was tired of it. He wasn't having it anymore. And he runs toward the battle. And I guess that this moment kind of begs the question for all the rest of us is like, what is our passion? What is the thing that we're willing to run toward? And the passion question is this then, what is the name of your Goliath? Which at the end of the day, this is what you need to get around, is what is your Goliath? What is the thing that God is calling you to do? And there's a blank there that you can fill out, And think about that in your own life. And there are these three questions that go with it. Who do you want to fight for? What battle are you running toward? And how do you seek to influence that cause and those people? And I really think it's worth taking time to just look in your own heart and to begin to ask some questions. Who are the people around me that I look at and I think, gosh, somebody should do something about that. Have you ever said that? Man, somebody should do something about that. Who's this somebody again? That would be you, right? If you're asking that question, if you're looking at that and going, that's not right, then you're the one. God is calling you, and it's worth taking some time to figure out what issues that make us excited or upset, or awaken our heart, that kind of thing. So there are three types of passions that we're talking about here. Ready? There's our people passion, it's our cause passion, and it's our influence passion. And so the first one is the who. It's your people passion. There are just certain groups of people that I would imagine all of us naturally care about. We just look at that and we go, you know what, for whatever reason, I'm just drawn toward them. Maybe it's based on your own story, right? Maybe you've had a particular experience in your life and you think, wow, because of this experience that I've had, I could really be helpful to other people in that same situation. Or maybe it's somebody, in your family that's got something going on and you're drawn toward that, or I don't know what that would be, but everybody has like a particular people passion, a few folks that we look at and we go, man, that's a group that I'm drawn toward. So here's some questions when you think about that. What group of people do you find that you care intuitively about, like you're just naturally going to care about them? Secondly, to what people has God sent you? In other words, whom do you sense God is moving you toward for the purpose of his mission? And to what people can you be a missionary? And I don't want you to misunderstand that term missionary. I'm not thinking you have to go to a people group somewhere in East Asia to make this work. You can be a missionary right here. You can be a missionary right here to somebody that's in our community. I think about it. I don't know if you were here on Dream Night, but we showed several videos of people who'd sort of unlocked their passions there. And one of them was Jim REITs, who's in our church. Jim is a fly fishing guide out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in part of the year, and then he's back here with his family, and his family then goes out there to be with him at times. But he used to describe it to me like, Rusty, I have the greatest job in the world and the most beautiful place in the world. Like, I fly fish for a living, and I take these people out, and we get to look at the Grand Tetons all day and float the river and catch beautiful fish, And he's like, it's so great. But as a believer, as someone who's called to serve, I think, what am I doing with this? Like, it's great that I take these people, but is God calling me to something greater? And he really began to ask himself that, like, what am I doing to serve people? And so we talked about that a little bit. And then he realized, what, some of the people that I'm called to are actually people who are like folks in my family. He's got siblings and folks who are in the military or who are policemen. And he said, what, they're really where my heart is. And so he started thinking, what if I were to reach out to wounded vets? Or what if I were to reach out to police who had PTSD or had some struggle going on in their world? And maybe take them out and take them fly fishing. What if I put together a board that could fund that to cover all their costs and so that they come out here and do that? So God just started welling up a dream, a vision in him, and he just came to me for advice and was like, should I do that? And I'm like, should you do that? You should, and you need a pastor to go with you to help you. I'm like, what can I do to assist you with this, brother? No, anyway, but And so he started going with it. He formed a board. He formed a group. He's got a website now and all this kind of stuff. And so he's beginning this process of expanding this ministry that God has called him to. And I'm like, that's a guy who found his people passion. You know, he took what he already was doing. He took his natural abilities. He looked at folks, that people who were connected into his family. He said, maybe there are other people out there like that. And he's doing it. So I don't know what that looks like for the rest of us. Maybe it's older folks in the nursing home who are lonely, don't have family. Sure love to have somebody come and sit down and have a conversation with them. Maybe it's teenagers who are in a tough place. College students who are far from home and would love to have somebody to consider family here while they're in school. Maybe it's children in our partner communities of Nicaragua or Uganda. People of other faiths who are lost and don't know Christ, and you feel compassion for them, love for them. Maybe it's folks with special needs. I don't know. What is your people passion? You know, that's something that maybe you need to fill in that blank. If it's not today, at some point, you need to pray and say, God, who are those people that I'm drawn to and how can I serve them best? So that's the first one. The second one is the what, which is your cause passion. You know, this is found by looking at the issues or causes that you're naturally drawn to out there. Things that you're captivated by, that when you see it happen, you go, man, I need to be involved in that, or that's something worth fighting for. The questions with that is, what group of causes lights you up? And if there was one area where you could make a difference, what would that look like? Is that eradicating poverty, childhood hunger, illiteracy, so on and so forth, foster care? I don't know. It's a lot of places. And the thing that I need to say here is, you don't have to be a pastor to do these things, right? I've said that before so many times. Like, there's the priesthood of all believers. That is in the New Testament, which says if you are a believer, you are baptized, you're ready to go. Go do it. You can do it. We can help. Okay, there's that. Last thing, the how, your influencing passion. This one's a little bit different than the other two in that the how speaks directly to unleashing this passion and sort of this influencing style that we all have. We find these influencing styles in Ephesians 4, 7, 11 through 13. Paul says this, but to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So what Paul does here is he highlights these 5 things, 5 influencing styles that everybody has at least one and can grow into pretty much any of these. They're these: the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the shepherd, and the teacher. Apest, if you will. And so with these 5 things, we find these roles that reflect the calling of every individual in the church. Jesus lived fully these 5 things. He was the only one who's ever lived perfectly out of these 5 things. And each one of us has one, at least, and we can live into the 5. So here's what they mean. The apostle is somebody who extends and sends. The apostle is somebody who loves to start new things. They love to pioneer things, to blaze new trails. That's high on my gift list in starting this church. You know, I love seeing that new thing begin to happen, all of that. So this is the one who is on mission of being sent, and those who have this apostolic style influence others by emphasizing the work of sending and multiplying. They love that idea of being sent. The prophet questions and critiques. You remember, the prophet is the one who in the Old Testament would just call out Israel's sin. Like, you guys are totally missing it. You know, the prophet is the one who critiques and says, you know what, something's got to change here. Something's not right. And is willing to call that out. They're guardians of the covenant relationship, guardians of God's word and his ways. The evangelist invites and gathers. So these are people who are influenced by recruiting others to the faith. They love sharing their faith, and they cannot stand that there are people in the world who are lost. And so they want to do everything that they can to reach the lost and bring them to faith in Christ. The shepherd or pastor is someone who protects and provides. These are people called to nurture spiritual development. They're the ones who sort of provide loving community, who care for others. They're compassionate towards people, right? And then the last one, the teacher, explains and organizes. These are people who sort of give wisdom and understanding to others based on what they've learned or what they've experienced in life. You got to have teachers to organize the apostles, because apostles and prophets are just running all over the place doing crazy things. So anyway, so if you think about it like two ends of the spectrum, you've got the apostles and prophets on one end. You got the teachers and the shepherds or pastors on the other end, right? Caring and compassionate people over here calling out sin, going crazy, trying to start new stuff. You got evangelists somewhere in the middle. They just want to reach the lost. They're not worried about what you're doing or what you're doing. They just want to make sure that people are coming in, right? So you can see that the church needs all of those. That's really the point here. You get that? You all have one. I have one. And when we all energize those things together, it's what unleashes the power of the church into this world, and it makes it this unstoppable force that God has designed. So we need all spectrums, all the way across to make it work. I kind of think about it like this. If we didn't have pioneers in the early days, we'd all still be stacked up living on the East Coast, right? We'd just be hanging out on top of each other. But we had pioneers who were willing to go. But you know what? If you didn't have settlers, we would have never built cities. If you didn't have builders, you would have never had people who would help it grow. So you got to have everybody involved in this, and it's the same way in the church. And you know, when you join your gifts and your abilities and your passion, something powerful happens. In fact, if you're a nuclear physics kind of a person, you'll know this word is fusion. You remember your nuclear physics class? You remember that one? It was a great class, right? It's where you learn that heavy nuclei, when they bond with not as heavy nuclei and it causes an explosion. Wow, I really know my physics, man. That's good stuff there. But anyway, an explosion happens with those nuclei. And it's the same thing that when you fuse these things together, an explosion happens in the spiritual world of good overcoming evil, which is the goal here that God is trying to accomplish through you and I. And you know, I'm reminded that Jesus gets this, doesn't he? Specifically and personally. I mean, his battle was the cross, wasn't it? His own giant was the cross, where he went and he chose to engage evil in its purest form, to overcome sin and death and the enemy by dying on a cross, so that we might know forgiveness of sin, so that we would not be overcome by sin and death, right? So that we could have salvation and forgiveness of sin, all of those kinds of things. Like, think about it like this. He won the war, and now he's here to help us win these battles that we face in this life, to help overcome this evil. And he's given us the power because he was raised from the dead. That death has no power over us. We have the power of the living Christ to help us do all that he's called us to do. And you know, David said in 1 Samuel 17, 46 and 47, he said, listen, the battle is the Lord's. So as we do what we do when we look at giants in our life and through our faith and we think, wow, that's a big one, we're reminded, yeah, but the battle is the Lord's. He wants to do it through me. And so it's not about me and how good I am or how capable I am. It's about how big my God is and how capable he is. Amen? All right, let's pray.